There's a house in North Carolina that no one talks about. A house where children vanished, where pain was routine, and where the walls held secrets darker than anyone could imagine. 2 children, gone. No missing persons report, no search parties, no questions asked, until one day, when an anonymous phone call shattered the illusion and led police to a horror story straight out of a nightmare. Welcome to the Deven House of Horrors. Let's pause for a second, because I know what you're thinking. Another true crime case? Another bad mother? What's new? Trust me, I hear you. We've seen every kind of disturbing parent-child crime play out. But let me tell you, this one isn't just another story about neglect, or another tragic case of a child slipping through the cracks. This is a case where children disappeared and nobody even noticed. Not the neighbors, not child protective services, not a single person. And the woman responsible? Well, she just went on with her life like nothing happened. Because for 4 years, Avantae Deven pulled off the impossible. She managed to erase her children, without a trace. So how does a mother make 2 of her own children vanish, without raising suspicion? And more importantly, how do you live with yourself knowing their last moments were spent in absolute horror? Well, Avantae Deven had a system, a foolproof plan, a method to her madness. And let's just say, it worked. Until, of course, it didn't. Let's rewind a little. Blake Deven and his sister London used to be alive. They were once real, breathing children who played, dreamed, and probably had favorite colors. But by the time authorities finally turned their attention to Deven's home, they were gone. Not just missing. Gone. And their bodies? Let's just say, what police found in Deven's backyard wasn't something even the most seasoned detectives were prepared for. Because when they finally checked that property, when they started digging, started searching, started piecing together what was left of these 2 kids, it became clear. This wasn't just neglect. This wasn't just murder. This was something much darker. So buckle in, because we're about to take a trip into one of the most horrifying child abuse cases in recent history. A case that should have been prevented. A case where the warning signs were everywhere, and yet nobody did a damn thing. Blake and London deserved better, but instead they got Avantae Deven, and she made sure their stories ended in silence. But tonight, we're going to break that silence. We're going to tell their story, and we're going to make sure nobody ever forgets it. Welcome to the Deven House of Horrors. Think about that. 2 kids, vanished, and their mother, silent. No Amber Alert, no police reports, no heart-wrenching TV pleas, just 2 missing children, and a woman going about her life like nothing ever happened. Now, I don't know about you, but if my neighbor's dog goes missing for more than a few hours, there's a full-blown search party, a neighborhood-wide text chain, and a laminated poster on every telephone pole within a 5-mile radius. But 2 human children? Nothing. It wasn't until 2023, years after London had disappeared and months after Blake was last seen, that someone finally said something. And you know what's even more terrifying? The tip-off didn't come from a concerned teacher, or a nosy neighbor, or even some long-lost family member piecing things together. It came from inside the house. One of Deven's surviving foster children made a mental health call, not to report a crime, not to confess, but because they were in such a state of distress that they needed help. And that single phone call, that's what finally cracked this case wide open. Fayetteville police arrive, expecting, well, probably some routine welfare check. What they find? Something that would haunt them forever. They search multiple residences the family had lived in. They dig through old backyards, sheds, storage units. And then they find the burn barrel. Now, let's take a moment to acknowledge something. Nothing good is ever found inside a burn barrel. It's not a place for happy memories. It's not where you keep childhood drawings. It's not a cozy backyard fire pit for roasting marshmallows. It's for one thing only: getting rid of evidence. Inside that barrel, officers find partial human remains, burned, dismembered, unrecognizable. Forensic tests later confirm the horrifying truth. The remains belong to a female aged 15 to 19 and a male aged 7 to 10. Now, let's do some math. London was last seen in 2019, Blake in 2022, years apart. Which means Deven didn't just kill them in some one-time snap of insanity. No, she did this twice, on two separate occasions. She had years to reflect, years to stop, years to, I don't know, not murder and burn her own children. But instead, she went right back to the same method, like it was routine. During the investigation, officers uncover more details. And somehow, it gets worse. Much worse. Blake and London weren't just murdered. They were tortured. They lived in darkness, locked away in a small room. They were given little to no food. And when they did eat, they had to earn it, by writing hundreds of apology paragraphs. Imagine that. A starving child, pencil shaking in their tiny hand, desperately writing for the chance to eat. That's not punishment. That's psychological warfare. At this point, you have to ask yourself, how does anyone get away with this? How do two children completely disappear without raising suspicion? How do schools, doctors, anyone just not notice? But here's the thing, someone did notice. Child Protective Services had been called before. Blake and London had tried to tell people. Social workers had seen bruises. Good, they had heard the horror stories. And yet, nothing was done. Why? Because Deven was Dot. She knew what to say. She played the system like a well-rehearsed script. She was a master manipulator, hiding behind the perfect mask of a devoted mother. And for years, that mask held, until the cracks finally split wide open, until that single phone call in 2023 changed everything, until police uncovered what she had tried so hard to erase. Blake and London Deven, not missing, not runaways, not forgotten, murdered. And tonight, we're telling their story, because their silence ends now. What they found was enough to make even the most seasoned detectives stop in their tracks. When police started digging through Deven's properties, they expected something bad. But this was something out of a horror movie. Inside that rusted, soot-covered barrel, bones, teeth, fragments of a human skull. Forensic testing confirmed the grim truth. A girl, 15 to 19 years old. A boy, 7 to 10 years old. London, Blake. They weren't missing. They were never missing. They were here the whole time, burned, discarded, forgotten. Now let's take a moment to appreciate just how insanely bold this was. Burning bodies in your own backyard? Not exactly subtle. Not exactly master criminal behavior. This isn't some meticulously planned crime scene cleanup. This is desperation. This is someone who thought, fire solves everything. Which, to be fair, it does. Just not when you leave behind literal bone fragments. Because here's the thing about fire. It doesn't destroy everything. Not unless you're dealing with cremation-level heat. And last time I checked, Deven wasn't running an industrial furnace in her backyard. So instead of erasing evidence, she basically left behind a forensic gold mine. And trust me, if there's one group of people you don't want to hand a gold mine to, it's forensic analysts. These people can take a single speck of ash and tell you what brand of cereal you had for breakfast in 1997. It didn't take long for investigators to confirm the horrifying truth. These weren't just any bones. This wasn't some tragic accident. This was murder. And suddenly, the question wasn't just, where are London and Blake? It was, how long has this been happening? Let's talk about Avantae Deven for a second. Because when she was brought in for questioning, she did something unexpected. She talked. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't deny anything. She didn't even seem that surprised to be sitting in an interrogation room. Instead, she acted like she was mildly inconvenienced, like she had just been pulled over for a busted taillight. When asked about Blake, she casually told police he had died at home. Her story? He got sick. He stopped breathing. She panicked. So naturally, instead of calling 911 like literally any sane person, she thought, you know what? Let's go straight to Plan B and burn the body in my backyard. Right. Because that doesn't sound suspicious at all. And if you're thinking, wait, where was Child Protective Services in all of this? Oh, don't worry. CPS had been involved, multiple times. But Deven? She was good at one thing, lying. She told social workers Blake was homeschooled. She claimed London had gone to live with a relative. She made up excuse after excuse. And somehow it worked. Because when you foster children, you're given a certain level of trust. And Deven? She used that trust as a weapon. At this point, police knew they had a double homicide on their hands. But the why, the motive, that was still a mystery. Because Deven wasn't some drug addict. She wasn't a struggling single mother barely holding it together. She was, by all appearances, a dedicated foster mom. So what the hell went wrong? The money, foster care payments, thousands of dollars. And that's when it hit them. London and Blake weren't children to her. They were paychecks, disposable, replaceable. And when they became too much trouble, she cut her losses, literally. London and Blake Deven. They never had a chance. Not in that house. Not with that woman. But now, their story is being told, because monsters like Deven thrive in silence. And tonight, we break that silence. For good. This was not a home. This was a prison. And Avantae Deven was the warden. The brutal conditions Blake and London endured. Locked away in darkness. Starved. Forced to earn food by writing hundreds of punishment sentences, beaten until their frail bodies begged for medical help. Help that never came. London took her last breath in that darkness, alone, starved, forgotten. And then, Blake suffered the same fate. Let's talk about the room. Because this wasn't just neglect, this wasn't just bad parenting, this was deliberate, calculated suffering. The children were kept in filthy, windowless conditions. No toys, no blankets, no warmth, just isolation. Blake and London weren't allowed to speak unless spoken to. They weren't allowed to move freely unless given permission. And food. Food was a privilege they had to earn, by writing hundreds of punishment sentences, over and over and over again. I will be good. I will listen. I will not make mommy mad. Miss a line, no dinner. And when that wasn't enough to satisfy Deven's twisted sense of control, she beat them, hard, repeatedly, until their small bodies were covered in bruises, welts, and scars. And no one stopped her, because no one knew, or worse, because no one cared enough to ask. London was the first to break. Her tiny body simply couldn't take it anymore. Days without food, endless nights of isolation, the suffocating darkness. It all caved in. And one night, locked away in her tiny, airless prison, she stopped breathing. Just like that. And how did Deven react? Did she cry? Did she panic? Did she, for even 1 second, feel regret? Number. She did exactly what she always did. She lied. She told people London had gone to live with a relative. She erased her, as if she never existed. No funeral, no police report, no missing persons case, just gone. And that should have been the end of it. Deven got away with it. She could have stopped. But she didn't. Because now, there was still Blake. And in Deven's mind, Blake was just another mouth to feed. Another burden. So she did it again. First came the starvation. She slowly cut back his meals until he was so weak he could barely stand. Then the punishments became worse. Locked away for hours, then days, then weeks. Until one day Blake stopped screaming. He stopped crying. He stopped fighting. And just like London, he withered away in that darkness. By the time Deven realized Blake was dead, it was too late to cover her tracks. 2 children, gone. And the walls, they held the secrets, they held the truth. And soon, that truth would come spilling out. Because monsters like Deven always think they're invincible. But even the best liars slip up eventually. And when the authorities finally came knocking, Deven was about to learn the hard way. That no secret stays buried forever. The walls were closing in on Avantae Deven, and she had no idea. Instead of mourning, Deven went into damage control mode. Because when most people lose a child, they grieve, they cry, they break down, they call for help. But not Deven. Her first instinct was to cover her tracks. She had 2 options. Make the evidence disappear. Guess which one she chose. And here's where things get even darker. Because Deven didn't just hide the body. She forced someone else in the household to help her. We don't know exactly how she convinced them. Threats, manipulation, the same fear that kept everyone in that house silent. Maybe all of the above. But what we do know, someone, other than Deven, was forced to help dispose of Blake's body. His remains were hidden, discarded, just like London, just like he never existed. And then, life moved on, at least, for Deven. She went on like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't buried 2 of her own children, like she hadn't destroyed the lives of every other kid in that house. Because in her mind, she had gotten away with it. But then, she made a mistake. Because secrets, they don't stay buried forever. Not really. And the truth? It always has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. It started with a single phone call. One of Deven's surviving foster children, someone who had lived in that nightmare, finally spoke up. That call set everything in motion. Authorities started digging. First, into the household. Then, into Deven herself. And then, they started asking questions about Blake. That's when they realized Blake was never actually reported missing, not until a year after his death. And do you know who reported him missing? Deven herself. Imagine the audacity, the sheer level of arrogance it takes to file a missing persons report for a child you know is dead, a child you buried. But here's the thing about playing dumb. It only works if you're actually smarter than the people investigating you. And Deven? She wasn't. Not even close. Because once police started pulling at the threads, the whole story began to unravel. And soon, they were about to find the biggest piece of evidence yet. The kind of evidence you can't talk your way out of. The kind that screams the truth, loud and clear. A body. Or at least, what was left of one. And when they found it, that was the beginning of the end for Avantae Deven. Justice is a strange thing. It doesn't erase the past. It doesn't bring the dead back. And in cases like this, it feels like it arrives just a little too late. On a crisp morning, police stood before a sea of cameras, not to ask for help, not to search for a missing child. This time, they were announcing what they had found. And it was worse than anyone imagined. The details were brutal. Blake and London weren't just neglected. They were starved. They were beaten. They were locked away for days at a time. And when Blake's body was finally discovered, his small frame told the whole story. Blake's body could not sustain the inhumane treatment he endured, a sterile way of saying he never stood a chance. And then came the charges. 2 counts of first-degree murder, concealment of a death, kidnapping, felony child abuse. If there was a law for it, she had broken it. She was booked, no bond, no more walking free, no more hiding behind fake smiles and crocodile tears, just cold steel bars and the weight of her crimes. For the first time in her life, Deven lost control. She couldn't manipulate, she couldn't threaten, she couldn't make anyone stay silent. Not anymore. But then, the question comes, is this really justice? Because what does justice even look like for children who spent their last moments in agony? Does a prison sentence undo their suffering? Does it erase the years of torture? Does it bring them back? The truth? There is no justice here, only punishment. And it will never be enough. Because some scars, the kind left on innocent children, they never heal. You know what's worse than a monster in the dark? A monster standing in plain sight, and nobody doing a damn thing about it. Blake and London Deven never stood a chance. Not against Avantae Deven. Not against a system that was supposed to protect them. Not against the indifference that let them slip through the cracks. And the scariest part? They aren't the first, and they sure as hell won't be the last. It happens again and again. A child reports abuse. A caseworker visits. A neighbor hears something. A teacher sees the bruises. A police report is filed. And yet, somehow, nothing is done. Until it's too late. The system isn't broken. It works just fine. For the wrong people. For monsters like Deven. For those who know exactly how to play the game. They know when to cry on cue. They know how to say the right things. They know how to exploit loopholes, stall investigations, and intimidate witnesses. And before you know it, another child vanishes. London was never even reported missing. Let that sink in. A child, dead, gone, and the world just kept moving. Blake and London deserved better. They deserved a childhood. They deserved safety. They deserved to live. But they never got that chance. And the only question left is, how do we make sure this never happens again? Because until we do, this story won't be the last.